A woman attended a Christmas party with her young daughter, but in the middle of the event, the girl suddenly disappeared. Hundreds of activists, police officers, and the FBI searched for her, yet they found no trace. Detectives had to piece together even the smallest clues, forming one of the most complex and challenging investigations. In the end, they managed to get close to solving the mystery, but the conclusion was far from what anyone expected. Friends, after watching, I recommend checking out my Telegram channel, where I publish intriguing crime stories from around the world every day. Melissa Brennan was born on April 12, 1984, in Texas. A few years later, her parents married, and her mother decided to move with her to a small town called Lorton, Virginia. It was a quiet, family-friendly place where people often settled down with children. Her mother, Tammy, took a job as an accountant at a local company and rented an apartment in a residential complex on the outskirts of the city. The complex consisted of several small apartment buildings. One of its main attractions was that the administration regularly organized events for residents and their children. These events were held every Friday as well as on holidays, creating a strong sense of community. As a result, many residents knew each other well, had friends within the complex, and enjoyed good neighborly relations. Melissa enjoyed living there. When they first moved in, she was 5 years old and spent much of her time playing in the yard with other children. She also loved attending the events hosted by the complex, where there was always plenty of fun activities and delicious food. On December 3rd, the complex management organized a Christmas party, held in a separate building divided into several rooms. Around 200 residents participated in the celebration, mingling in groups while their children played and ran around nearby. At about 10 p.m., Tammy decided it was time to head home. She called out to Melissa, asking her to bring their jackets while she said her goodbyes to friends. Melissa had asked her mother if she could grab some chips, and Tammy agreed. A few minutes later, after Tammy had finished saying goodbye to her neighbors, she noticed that Melissa still hadn't returned. Concerned, Tammy began searching through each hall and checked the corridors, but her daughter was nowhere to be found. She started asking people nearby if they had seen Melissa, and with each passing minute her worry grew. Soon, word of the girl's disappearance spread among the neighbors. Many of them joined Tammy in searching the building and nearby streets, but there was no sign of Melissa. Eventually, Tammy decided to call the police. Within minutes, officers arrived at the complex and immediately joined the search, inspecting the entire area. By this time, more and more neighbors had heard about the missing girl, and in total, over 300 people became involved in the search. Initially, the police suspected that Melissa may have wandered outside and gotten lost. However, as the search continued, this theory seemed increasingly unlikely. It was cold and dark outside, making it unlikely that Melissa could have wandered far. Additionally, she knew the complex well despite her young age, so the police doubted she would have ventured in an unfamiliar direction. The situation was complicated by the fact that a large forest bordered the complex, raising the possibility that Melissa might have gone into the woods. An inspection of the party venue yielded no clues. Melissa's jacket wasn't found, and there was no evidence that could shed light on her disappearance. The only detail the police noted was an open window in the kitchen. They speculated that Melissa could have exited through it, but this theory seemed unlikely. As they continued their search, police began questioning everyone who had attended the event. None of the neighbors recalled seeing Melissa leave the building or anyone escorting her outside. No one reported anything unusual that evening. The police also asked if there had been any conflicts involving Melissa, or if she had experienced any strange or troubling interactions with anyone from the complex, but no issues were reported. Tammy was convinced that she had a good relationship with all the residents and had never had even the slightest hint of conflict with anyone. The police initially considered the possibility that Melissa's father might have taken her, as family abductions are not uncommon in such cases. However, they quickly confirmed that he was in Texas at the time and could not have been in Virginia. With no other leads, the police decided to expand the search area. Some officers searched the nearby forest while others checked the surrounding buildings. Despite the late hour, hundreds of local residents continued to help the police search for the missing girl. Unfortunately, this effort also yielded no results. There was no trace of Melissa in the forest or in any of the buildings within the complex. After this, the police asked the volunteers to return home and decided to conduct a thorough search of each apartment in the complex. In total, about 400 people lived in the complex, and that night, the police spoke with each one of them. None of the residents had any idea where Melissa might have gone, so the police asked them to recall any strange or suspicious events that might have occurred on the complex grounds, even if they didn't seem directly related to the girl's disappearance. This questioning led to the first promising lead. Several women reported that a maintenance worker at the complex named Khalip Hughes had been acting inappropriately that evening. He had tried to flirt with them and made suggestive, inappropriate comments even though most of these women were with their husbands. The 23-year-old man had also raised concerns among parents as some felt he was paying an unusual amount of attention to their children. After hearing numerous complaints, the police questioned Tammy again, asking if she had noticed any odd behavior from Hughes. She recalled that during the event, Hughes had approached her several times and even engaged in conversations specifically about her daughter. Hughes had also suggested to Tammy that he could take Melissa to the bathroom if she wanted to stay involved in the party, which Tammy found unsettling. This raised further suspicions, and the police decided to speak with him. However, Hughes was nowhere to be found on the complex grounds, so officers went to his home, located just a few kilometers away. When they arrived, Hughes wasn't there, but his wife informed them that he hadn't returned home that evening. The police left but returned a few hours later, and by then Hughes was home. He told officers that he had arrived around midnight. This was suspicious, as Hughes had left the complex nearly 2.5 hours earlier, even though his commute home should have taken no more than 10 minutes. When questioned about the time discrepancy, Hughes claimed he had taken a long detour to buy alcohol. However, the police found his explanation doubtful. A trip to the store still couldn't account for almost 3 hours unaccounted for. Second, state law restricted the sale of alcohol at certain hours, making his story even more questionable. Additionally, Hughes was unable to provide a receipt. The situation looked increasingly suspicious, and the police asked him to hand over the clothes he had worn to work that day. Here, more strange details emerged. Hughes claimed he had put all his work clothes in the washing machine as soon as he came home. Nonetheless, he provided his clothing as requested. To the officers' surprise, they found that he had washed his shoes along with his clothes, a highly unusual choice. Even more suspiciously, part of one shoe was cut off. Alongside his clothes, they also found a pocket that seemed designed to hold a large knife and a leather belt. When the police asked where the knife was, Hughes claimed he couldn't remember. With all this evidence, detectives began to strongly suspect that Hughes might be directly connected to Melissa's disappearance. They took his clothes to the lab, where forensic experts applied luminol to his shoes. Under the luminol, traces of blood became visible on the shoes. However, the experts couldn't take a sample of the blood for analysis, as very little remained after being washed. The detectives returned to Hughes's home and brought him in for questioning. During the lengthy interrogation, Hughes stuck to his story, despite the inconsistencies and suspicious evidence. He claimed he had no idea who Melissa was, what she looked like, or what had happened to her. The police knew Hughes was lying. Multiple witnesses, including Tammy, had seen him interacting with Melissa and other children at the party. When detectives confronted him saying, "We know you're lying," Hughes responded defiantly, "Prove it." Despite their confidence in his involvement, the police lacked enough solid evidence to make an arrest, so they had to release him. The next day, investigators intensified the search. hoping to find either Melissa or additional evidence that could lead to a breakthrough. Additionally, around 400 volunteers responded to the call for assistance. Melissa's father, who had traveled from Texas as soon as he heard the news, joined the search as well. The police printed thousands of flyers with information about Melissa's disappearance, aiming to inform as many local residents as possible. It's worth noting that just 5 months prior to Melissa's disappearance, another young girl had gone missing in the same city. Her body was later found, but her killer was never identified. While the large-scale search for Melissa continued, a forensic team returned to inspect the residential complex. Previously, the only notable observation had been an open window in the building. Upon closer examination, the specialists discovered something intriguing. Outside the window, they found a faint trace of an adult-sized shoe print leading toward the parking lot, but no traces of a child's footprints. This suggested that the abductor might have carried Melissa directly to a vehicle. The police had already examined Hughes's car but were unable to find any conclusive evidence. Meanwhile, the FBI was brought onto the case. Since they still didn't have enough evidence to arrest Hughes, they placed him under 24-hour surveillance. Additionally, the court ordered him to provide a DNA sample in case any new evidence surfaced. As investigators delved into Hughes's background, they discovered a history of multiple arrests dating back to his teenage years. Additionally, Hughes had a history of alcohol abuse and using illegal substances, which had previously drawn the attention of authorities. Furthermore, a few years before the incident, Hughes had received a suspended sentence for a vehicular manslaughter charge in a neighboring area. After investigating further, the police discovered that he had repeatedly violated the terms of his probation, which led the judge to revoke it and impose a prison sentence. This allowed detectives to place Hughes in jail, even though it was for a lesser crime. Over the following week, the police continued searching for Melissa, but unfortunately, no new leads emerged. The search was challenging, as most of the designated area was densely forested, and a large river also ran through it. About 2 months after Melissa's disappearance, the case took an unexpected turn. An unknown man called Tammy claiming that Melissa was with him and demanding a ransom of $75,000. Tammy immediately informed the police. FBI agents instructed her to gather the requested amount and go to the meeting location specified by the caller. Beforehand, they strategically positioned several agents around the area, preparing for the suspect's arrival. Soon after Tammy arrived, the suspect showed up and FBI agents swiftly moved in and arrested him. It turned out that the suspect had no connection to Melissa's disappearance. The suspects were 2 students from a local university who had seen the news about the missing girl and decided to exploit the situation for money. Instead, they ended up with real prison sentences. One received 7.5 years, while the other was sentenced to 4 years behind bars. In this way, the investigators once again found themselves at a dead end. They had a suspect but no evidence, and Melissa was still missing. So they decided to examine the car again, this time involving FBI forensic specialists with advanced equipment. However, there was one complication. The car belonged to Hughes's wife, so the police needed her permission. Fortunately, she immediately consented. First, they applied luminol, which revealed traces of blood on the seat, the steering wheel, the dashboard, and the front windshield. This discovery only intensified the suspicions surrounding Hughes. However, extracting DNA from the blood traces was impossible, so the forensic experts decided to examine the car for hair, fibers, and other potential evidence. The car's interior was in complete disarray. The seats and floor were covered with dirt, trash, and dog hair, making it challenging to locate any meaningful evidence. One of the experts then had an idea. He used adhesive tape on his hands to collect any potential evidence by pressing it across various surfaces in the car. The collected samples were then sent to an FBI forensic specialist for further analysis. The tape revealed a large amount of dog hair. which was irrelevant to the case, as Hughes and his wife owned 2 large dogs. But soon, the expert noticed another type of hair that did not belong to a dog or a human. Upon closer examination, the expert determined that it was black rabbit fur, identical to the type used in Melissa's mother's jacket. The expert asked Tammy to bring in her jacket and confirm that the fur was an exact match. The police theorized that the fur could have transferred onto Melissa's clothing when Tammy went to retrieve their jackets, or that it may have easily brushed off during their interactions. Under normal circumstances, this transfer was likely, as Tammy often wore the jacket during the winter, and Melissa was frequently close to her. In addition, the expert found a single light-colored hair that matched Melissa's hair from her comb, but that wasn't all. He also discovered a large amount of tiny red and blue fibers on the passenger seat of the car. Since Melissa was wearing a sweater and pants in these 2 colors on the evening she disappeared, the police now wanted to obtain the exact same clothing models to establish a possible connection. They spoke with Tammy, who had purchased the outfit for Melissa, but she couldn't recall the specific store. The police tried to locate these clothing models in local stores, but they had no success. The expert analyzing the fibers kept searching for a way to establish a match between these fibers and Melissa's clothing. One evening, he mentioned to his wife how challenging the task was, and admitted he had no idea how to solve it. Then, his wife asked him to describe the outfit in detail. She suggested that clothing in this style might be sold by a major retail chain, J.C. Penney. She and her husband had several children, so she was constantly shopping there for them. Moreover, her house was filled with hundreds of catalogs from this store, accumulated over several years. She began to go through them, and after some time she found a catalog released just before last Christmas. When she opened to page 11, she saw an outfit identical to the one Melissa had worn on the day of her disappearance. She showed it to her husband. It was an exact match. The FBI immediately reached out to the company, but they encountered another setback. The outfit model was completely sold out. However, the company's employees suggested a possible solution. This particular outfit was sold exclusively through the catalog, and they had distributed 7,000 pieces. They offered to provide the investigators with information on all the buyers so they could request access to the outfit. The police began reviewing the list, which took quite some time, but ultimately led to a breakthrough. They tracked down a man in Kentucky who had purchased the outfit for his daughter, but found it was the wrong size. As a result, the outfit had remained unopened in its packaging for a year, which was ideal for the investigators. The man sent them the set, and the forensic experts immediately began their analysis. This model had a unique feature. The manufacturer had included a specific detail not found in other clothing brands. For this set, the company developed and patented a unique shade of dark blue, labeled code number 887, which they hadn't used in any other models. Upon comparing the fibers, the expert concluded that they were an exact match. As a result, the police confirmed that Hughes's car contained fibers from one of the 7,000 children's outfits sold in that specific shade. Although this evidence didn't directly prove Hughes's involvement in Melissa's disappearance, it provided a strong link, suggesting his potential guilt. Most of the sales for this outfit were spread across the country, making the likelihood that anyone other than Melissa had worn it in Hughes's car incredibly low. In the end, the expert decided to try something more thorough. He collected over 100 clothing items in similar shades and conducted 7,983 comparative tests with the fibers found in Hughes's car. The results showed at least slight differences in all samples, except for 2. The fibers from the outfit and those from the car's passenger seat matched 100%. In this way, the expert completely ruled out the possibility that someone else wearing the same material had been in Hughes's car. It was almost certainly that exact set. Despite this, the detectives were still in a challenging situation. They understood that while this evidence was substantial, especially when combined with the blood found on Hughes's shoes and in his car, it wasn't definitive proof. But they had nothing else. They decided to move forward with a murder charge. According to the prosecution's theory, Melissa was already deceased based on the blood traces found. The presence of her fibers on the passenger seat and within the car raised serious questions about Hughes's motives and actions. In their view, Hughes approached Melissa when she went to retrieve the jackets at her mother's request. Then, under certain circumstances, he managed to lure her away. It's believed he took her through the window and carried her to his car. After that, he transported the victim to an unknown location and killed her, most likely with a knife. Hughes then disposed of the weapon and hid her body. This process took several hours, explaining his prolonged absence. After the murder, Hughes attempted to clean the blood from his car and his clothes, and he even cut off parts of his shoes to remove evidence. Finally, the police decided to conduct a polygraph test with Hughes, hoping that, combined with all the evidence, he would finally confess. The challenge was that, by law, a person couldn't be convicted of murder without the victim's body or a confirmed crime scene. This meant that without these, the punishment for murder would be significantly reduced. Investigators were still hoping for a confession. The polygraph results indicated that Hughes was deceptive in his responses, aligning with much of the evidence they had. However, he continued to deny his guilt. In the end, the detectives had no choice but to proceed with charging Hughes with murder and sending the case to court. The trial began more than 2 years after Melissa's disappearance, and Hughes continued to insist on his innocence. As expected, his lawyer attempted to discredit the evidence presented by the prosecution. However, the prosecution's arguments had a far greater impact on the jury. After 7 hours of deliberation, they found Hughes guilty, sentencing him to the maximum penalty of 50 years in prison. To this day, he remains in jail, continuing to deny any involvement in Melissa's disappearance. Despite several attempts by the police to locate her body, all efforts have been unsuccessful. 4 years after the trial, an employee of an energy company discovered red fabric pieces in the river that was part of the original search zone. Investigators immediately sent divers to the location, but this time, they still did not find Melissa. 8 years after her disappearance, her mother remarried and welcomed 4 children into her new family. Although she took her new husband's last name, she continued to use her previous name as well, just in case Melissa, if still alive, tried to find her. As for Hughes, his story didn't end there. On August 2, 2019, he was granted parole for good behavior, having served a little more than half of his sentence. At the time of his release, Hughes was 53 years old, and he has remained free for several years since. Melissa is still officially listed as a missing person, as her murder was never conclusively proven. However, at this point, almost no one believes that she could still be alive. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments, and don't forget to like this video if you found it interesting. Thank you for watching.